Oklahoma is the land of second chances. Who were the people that made it so? We'll dig for the golden threads they've woven through Oklahoma history. The Red River Institute is proud to present Oklahoma Gold. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert, along with award-winning author and Southern Nazarene University historian John J. Dwyer. We'll find the golden nuggets of Oklahoma history here now. Oklahoma Gold. Oklahoma's good angel. Who could that be? Chances are, you know. But John J. Dwyer, tell me her story.
Well, Gwen, here's what people from her generation said of her. Historian Angie DeBow, who was Oklahoma's greatest early historian, wrote, "She had power over an audience that seldom is equaled." The greatest, probably even earlier than that, around statehood historian of Oklahoma, Joseph Thoburn, wrote, she is Oklahoma's most remarkable woman. And a modern-day historian named John Dwyer simply wrote,
I think I know him.
Yeah, and he said that she's the greatest hero in Oklahoma history, Kate Barnard.
How could someone be your personal hero?
Well, to me, it just kind of reveals how exciting history can be if we pursue it as the story of people. Our book, The Oklahomans, our Oklahoma history book, that Volume 1 is out, comes up through statehood, and then Volume 2 will be out next year that comes up to the present. The subtitle of that's The Story of Oklahoma's People. So I find when I teach, whether it's young or old, but particularly young people, if you talk to them about a bunch of dead folks and facts and figures that have no connection to them, it's the hardest thing in the world to generate any pulse out of that crew. But maybe it's taken some of us
especially
teachers,
because these people have no pulse at this point. But go ahead.
The people we're talking about, exactly. So some of us, it took longer maybe than it should have to realize that, maybe I'm part of the problem here. And is there a different way to do this? Is there some responsibility on my shoulders? Now, the teachers out there of Oklahoma, I think, have done a great job of that. John Dwyer, as a teacher, it took me a while. As opposed to facts, figures, dead people with no connection to us, how about stories of amazement, of uniqueness, and even of inspiration about real people, whatever the time period? We're talking about a woman, Kate Barnard, that lived a century ago. But it's amazing how when you talk about this person, all 5 feet and 90 pounds of her, and you talk about her story, Gwen, this was a woman whose father, John Barnard, was a first-generation Irish immigrant. That means he was an Irishman who came to America, to Nebraska, and then came to Oklahoma and rode not in just one land run, but two. And like many people, he rode in the run of 89, which is the unassigned lands where you and I are right here in OKC. He rode in that land run and did not get land. But he rode again in the great Oklahoma spirit of not giving up, land of second, third, and sometimes last chances. He rode again in the run of 91, the Sac and Fox run over in Pottawatomie County, eastern Oklahoma, and he got land in present-day Newalla. Well, this was a guy who was scrambling to earn a living. And by the way, Kate's father, his wife, died when she was less than 2 years old. So he was trying to be a dad and provide for his only child, Kate. And he was moving around, working where he could in territorial Oklahoma, and put Kate up in the two-room shack in Newalla at age 16. So for 2 years, she lived there by herself and ran the place. Then she made her way to downtown Oklahoma City, St. Joseph's Parochial School, the classic St. Joseph's Old Cathedral. I know many of us, certainly our Catholic friends, know what that is. She got a degree from there, taught there, and in rural schools for 9 years, became territorial clerk for Oklahoma and stenographer. And then in the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, that she was picked out of 500 applicants, Gwen, in 1904 to represent the territory of Oklahoma, soon to be state, as the territorial hostess and ambassador. This was the quote of one American leader at that World's Fair on Oklahoma's ambassador, Kate Barnard, quote, The slender, dark-haired woman of flashing eyes, smooth, highbrow, and olive skin found it easy to communicate with the leaders of the exposition, end quote. But that wasn't really the headline of that event for Kate Barnard, the St. Louis World's Fair. No, that it was actually the other end of the spectrum when she went with some other humanitarians and social workers and ministers to look at the slums of Chicago. And it became a turning point in her life. She got such a vision, Gwin, that when she returned to Oklahoma City in 1904, the fall of it, she felt like she had what writer Jim Logan in his great article in Oklahoma Today of last year, which I encourage our listeners to access. It's online, Oklahoma Today, June of 2019. It's called St. Kate. Jim Logan recalls how she felt like she had no less than a mandate from God to bear the torch for the less fortunate. She wrote an editorial in the Daily Oklahoman about the West Oklahoma City area, West Reno now, that she lived in, and the benighted health and poverty. And it was so powerful that it brought in over 10,000 garments to her home from people in Oklahoma City. She leveraged that to begin a program of providing health care and all sorts of things, even hundreds of jobs to the poor folks in West Oklahoma City in 1904 and 05. She was working as a stenographer for the city attorney of Oklahoma City when she got fired. Why? Because she wouldn't work on Sundays. So Kate Barnard was a devout, from what everything I've read, a devout Christian and Catholic from early on in life, and that helped spark her call for service to the less fortunate. She became the head of the United Provident Association in Oklahoma City in 1905, which became the United Way, is what we call it today. And then, as the conventions took place pursuant to Oklahoma statehood, the Sequoia Convention of the Indian Territory in 1905, and then the Oklahoma State Convention in 1906, Kate Barnard had become such a force that what was called Kate's Planks, that is 25 initiatives that she declared must be in the Oklahoma Constitution, they became the driving force of that Constitution. And no leader, no potential statesman, politician from Oklahoma or Indian Territory dared veer off of Kate's planks. So popular and powerful was her voice. You say, well, what were these planks? Again, this was before we became a state. How about requiring that children in Oklahoma go to school? Okay?
What?
That they get to go to school. It shouldn't be have to go, but they get to go to school.
It was not a mandate prior to that?
And I'll tell you in a minute how many we found out were not going. How about mine inspections? The coal mines in the old Choctaw country, related to that child labor laws, because many of those people working in the mines were little children. How about 8-hour work days for public employees? How about a corporation commission to regulate business and industry? Well, in 1907, she was elected with more votes as Commissioner of Charities and Corrections in Oklahoma when it became a state, with no women voting, than the governor of the state himself.
And they call her Oklahoma's Angel on Oklahoma Gold. Oklahoma's Angel is Kate Barnard. John J. Dwyer, the golden thread is that if you go to the state capitol, you can sit next to her. But what is the golden nugget of her early life as Oklahoma's Angel?
This woman was so small of stature, or so small of physical stature, but so giant of spiritual and character stature. This is going to be our first two-part program. So we'll continue and conclude Kate's story next week, but there's plenty left to go in the last few minutes that we have tonight, because if you remember, before the break, she had just got elected. Now, this was a woman, this is statehood, the first election day upon Oklahoma statehood in 1907. This was a time when women did not have the vote in America. Now, there were certain states that themselves allowed women to vote, but Oklahoma was not one of them, and there was not a federal law.
Oklahoma women could not vote for Kate Barnard.
That is exactly right.
And yet, this is what got us started doing Oklahoma Gold. She got more votes than anybody else.
That's right. She got more votes than two men who ran against each other for governor, who became the first two governors of Oklahoma. She got more votes for Commissioner of Charities and Corrections from an all-male electorate, Kate Barnard, in 1907 Oklahoma. Now, that wasn't probably a real politically correct, I don't think we had all of the particular sensitivities that we do today on some of these gender and other issues. But yeah, Kate Barnard, in fact, it said, Gwin, I think it's pretty decisively said and recorded, that Kate Barnard was such a force at the Oklahoma State Constitutional Convention in Guthrie. That is the convention that formed the Constitution and the laws of the state of Oklahoma prior to statehood. She was such a force, all 5 feet and 90 pounds of her, that the word went around, we've got to come up with an office for Kate. Governor, a woman wouldn't even be allowed in it at that time. We've got to come up with an office because Kate has to be in the governor. The people won't stand for her not to be. So that was Commissioner of Charities and Corrections. So what did she do in this role? Well, we talked before the break about, and this is one reason why I consider her the greatest hero in Oklahoma history. She was the person that noticed, took concern for, and did something about, fought for the overlooked, the forgotten, the marginalized. In a time, and keep in mind, this was a rough-hewn frontier. Okay, this was a place where you had your first mayor of Oklahoma City, William Couch. We know that name well from downtown Oklahoma City. Was killed in a gunfight over a land plot in downtown Oklahoma City.
The first mayor was killed in a gunfight?
He sure was, and depending on if you talked to his relatives or people that didn't like him, it was either an ambush or a straight-up fight. But he died of gunfire. That was our first mayor in Oklahoma City. Okay, you had years after the events we're talking about here, statehood, you had the governor of Oklahoma in the 1920s had the Oklahoma National Guard mount machine gun nests behind sandbags at the entrances to the state capitol to keep the legislature from meeting who was getting ready to impeach him, Jack Walton. This was a tough bunch. Now, we really do, rightfully, I think, revel in our frontier pioneer spirit. But, and this is one of the things about history that makes it interesting, is that it's not one-dimensional. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's all bad, or at least most people aren't all bad. And in early Oklahoma, you had the tough kind of people it took to settle a pioneer in a prairie and to overcome many obstacles. But they would not fit in today's constellation of politically correct heroes in certain ways, such as women did not have the vote, but they did vote in Kate Barnard, and she looked past the problems of the day and realized that, wow, there are folks we are not taking care of, we're overlooking. For instance, she started out by ripping to shreds, verbally and in public, the Oklahoma City Pest House. Now, that's not bugs and spiders. That's where that'd be like almost a leper colony. People with contagious diseases like smallpox and others would be sent. She said it's a disgrace how poorly these people are taken care of. She brought in national authorities on child labor, juvenile delinquency, prison reform, and mental health to Oklahoma to educate the public and the legislators, again, in this frontier place of Oklahoma. And she went in and inspected jails, orphanages, and institutions for the deaf, blind, and mentally ill. In those years, it was common for children to work in eastern Oklahoma mines. Well, she got 500 children out of those mines and got them put into school. So we'll talk about more next week about the impact she actually had on this state. But I want to say, just kind of in closing here, that as she went to war for the children, as she went to war to set up orphanages for children, as she improved labor conditions, as she paved the way for women to participate in social reform. This was a quote from Kate Barnard. She said, "My success is not because of a greater mentality than my sisters. It is simply because I dared to act."
Kate Barnard, Oklahoma Gold. More to come.